Especially on the way Matthew and Luke were written. Matthew and Luke have many of the stories in Mark, and sometimes they have the stories actually in the same words as Mark. And for hundreds and hundreds of years, since the 4th century at least, biblical scholars have recognized that the reason they have so many of the stories in the same words is that somebody's copying somebody else. And so the idea is usually thought that Matthew and Luke actually copied some of their stories from Mark. That's why they're verbatim the same in so many places.
Now, what is proto-Orthodox Christianity?
Yes, okay. So proto-Orthodox Christianity, one of the things that I've studied in a number of my books, including my book Lost Christianities and in somewhat in my book Misquoting Jesus, is this phenomenon that I call proto-Orthodox Christianity. In early Christianity, there were a variety of Christian groups that believed a variety of things. Some of them that would seem wild and crazy to most Christians today. But there were battles for who would be right and who would be wrong, and who would get the most converts, and who would establish what the standard view would be. The standard view is called orthodoxy. The word orthodoxy means the correct belief. So the people who ended up winning these battles over what to believe called themselves orthodox, meaning they had the correct beliefs, and everyone else they called heretics. A heresy is means choice. It's a choice not to believe the right things. And so proto-orthodoxy is what people were saying that led to orthodoxy before it was orthodoxy. So you have a lot of different Christian groups saying a lot of different things. One of these groups wins out and calls itself orthodox. But what do you call this group before they win out? I call them proto-orthodox because they're representing the views that eventually are going to triumph in Christianity.
And what are some of the more interesting stories to come out of that proto-orthodox Christianity as it relates to the New Testament that we have today?
Well, there are a lot of, the proto-Orthodox scribes are the ones who gave us these 5,500 manuscripts we have. If heretics copied the text and changed the text in a heretical way, those manuscripts apparently got destroyed. And so we have manuscripts then from the proto-Orthodox, and sometimes they changed the text in significant ways. I mean, as one example, there were debates in early Christianity about who Jesus was. Was he a human being who was chosen by God? Was he God who only seemed to be a human being? Was he both God and human? What was he? And scribes who knew about these debates would sometimes change the Gospels in order to make the Gospels reflect their own points of view. And so one of the arguments was, is Jesus really human or not? There's this famous passage in the Gospel of Luke where Jesus, before being arrested, sweats great drops as if of blood. So this is the bloody sweat. And this is where when people say, he was sweating blood, that's what they're referring to as this passage. It turns out this passage was not originally in the Gospel of Luke. It's not in our oldest and best manuscripts of Luke. And it looks like the reason it's there now is because there were Christians who wanted to argue that Jesus was fully human. This was the Orthodox view. Jesus really was human. Even though he was God, he was really human. And this is a passage that portrays a very human Jesus, one who is in such deep agony that he's sweating blood, as it were.
Well, if you're just tuning in, again, the guest is Bart Ehrman. The book is God's Problem. We've been talking about a little bit of his research beyond this book as well, in misquoting Jesus, I think, and his other research as well. We've just got a couple more minutes here. One theory that you address in this book is called the so-called free will defense. What is the free will defense?
This is a view that most people that I talk to have for why they're suffering. So the way it works is this. God has created humans with free will. If he hadn't done that, we would simply be robots programmed to do what we do, or computers doing what we were programmed to do. But God wanted us to have free will so that we could choose to do what's right. But if we're able to choose what's right, we're also to choose what's wrong. If we have the freedom to love, we also have the freedom to hate. If we have the freedom to do good, we have the freedom to do evil. And so because we have free will, we necessarily can do bad things, and that explains why there's so much evil in the world. This is the most common explanation, I think, for why there's evil and suffering in the world. And, of course, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is how you can explain why the Nazis inflicted such terrible harm on Jews during the Holocaust, killing 6 million Jews. Well, they were exercising their free will. The problem with this explanation of free will is it doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain why there can be an earthquake in Pakistan that kills 50,000 people one night, or why there's a tsunami that kills 300,000 people, or lots of other any natural disaster.
Well, it seems like we're talking about two different issues here. You've got human-caused suffering, and then you just have random acts.
Yes, that's right. And so philosophers have tried to distinguish between what they would call moral evil, which would be evil by humans, and natural evil, which would be just things that happen in the world of nature. And any explanation for why there's suffering in the world has to take into account both things. It isn't good enough just to account for one or the other.
Well, we're down to about our last minute here. And my wife wanted me to ask you, as we're beginning to finish up our first book with a major publisher, how do you manage to balance so many different projects at one time?
Yeah, well, I do a lot of things. I write a lot of books. I've got 5 contracts now for books with major publishers, and I plan to write them. I guess part of the answer is I don't waste a lot of time. I don't watch a lot of TV for sports, and when I do something, I do it in a very focused way. And so the key is to be focused and concentrated, I think.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for being on the show today. The book is God's Problem. The author is Dr. Bart Ehrman. He is a professor at UNC Chapel Hill. For all of us here at the Artist Craft and RTN Channel 10, thank you very much for tuning in today. Thank you. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, sure. My pleasure.
A lot of fun.
Good. Yeah, great.
Very intellectual.